The Neil Prendeville Show on Twitter @NeilRedFM.
Good stuff. What's astonishing actually to me is the amount of texts on what we were talking about yesterday about children and about diet and about issues involving food. One parent of an autistic child who's mildly autistic only eats pizza and chips. Another heartbroken grandmother whose 2-year-old grandson sticks his fingers back his throat to get sick. Stories like that, and people are just beside themselves with worry and with anguish and with grief. And then you read things this morning like children not knowing what the different kinds of meat and where they come from, not being able to recognize vegetables when they do these tests and surveys, and many of them, 50-something% of them, not knowing where chips come from, for instance. Anyway, with all that in mind and lots more besides, I'm going to plough through a lot of those texts and calls again this morning. But I said I would talk with other people who'd be more directly involved in this type of health and welfare issue on a full-time basis. And amongst them is the health professional Michael Doherty at michaelodoherty.com. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
And it's interesting that I was due to talk to you this morning, and out comes this survey when it shows the ignorance of people with regards to their food, where it comes from, or even recognizing different vegetables. What do you make of that? Does it surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think you and I were brought up in an environment where when we were young, we were out in the garden and we were sowing carrots and parsnips and cabbage and all of that.
Actually, I was, funnily enough, in the back garden, weirdly enough, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you see, the problem is we live in a convenient world now, It either comes frozen or packaged or canned. So, all the first time the kids sometimes kids are seeing this is, on the table. So they just take it and eat it. A lot of it is back to we just need to go back to have a look at nature and really how we've deviated so much from that. And it really comes back to educating our kids about the importance of food, because right now the types of food that we're taking into our system, I can guarantee you, is causing the vast majority of our illnesses, even the more serious of illnesses.
That's all very well, but yesterday we were talking with some of the parents have children who eat junk, nothing but junk, whether it's pizza or whether it's chips or whether it's fast food. But one of them was very worrying, and this is a 2-year-old who throws everything up, won't eat anything at all.
Yeah. We're seeing this more and more, Neil, and we're seeing the difficulty that parents are having, and in particular where you have a huge amount of sensory processing issues. I mean, we know in the most recent studies now, one in something like 65 or 68 children have some degree of learning or behavioural difficulty. And these learning and behavioural difficulties are not disassociated from the problems with regard to nutrition and diet and all of that kind of thing. And, I often say to parents is that if a mother gives birth to a child with any stress or whatever, and suddenly they find themselves in a situation where the child suffers from some form of reflux or has colic or something like that. As a month-old baby or as a 6-week-old baby, a mother is at home, the child has colic, it has reflux, it has bloatedness, suddenly ends up maybe getting nasally and sort of congested, and then suddenly going to the GP, and the GP maybe at that point prescribing something like maybe an antibiotic to try and resolve the problem in an already imbalanced gut environment. And there you lay the foundation for the problems that our 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 15-year-olds are having, and even on later in life. So a lot of this, begins from the point that the child is conceived in the womb, right to the process of development in the womb, from the birth right to the actual that processing. Everything starts at that level. That's the foundation.
So do you believe then that it could well be related to the 9 months in the womb and what the mother is going through, or whatever kind of a pregnancy she has, or the issues in her life, or the stress or the pressure she finds herself at, are automatically transferred into the womb to the unborn baby?
Well, without going into the quantum physics side of it.
No, don't do that.
There's a very good little clip on YouTube if anybody ever wanted to watch it. It's called From Conception to Birth. And I think that would clearly outline the complexities of, the mother and baby sort of relationship. And when you think that you have 60,000 miles of vessels in your body, 7 trillion nerves, your body's going through 24 different billion transactions right now, the complexity is huge. And any little disturbance there in that development can lay the foundation. If a mother is smoking, we know it causes problems. If a mother is drinking, it causes problems. But they don't have to be. If a mother is eating a high sugar diet or not eating the right food and rushing and is stressful in the normal stress of life today, then that lays the foundation for it. So there has to be a reason, and I find a lot of the reasons are back to stress and nutrition, and if that can be somewhat dealt with, and I mean we would see women now who are looking to prepare for birth. Because infertility is a big issue, but now I see more and more women are looking to prepare to conceive through looking at ways of working with their energies, looking at ways of nutrition, so that they can give birth and give their baby every opportunity to develop without these types of problems. Because it's horrendous what parents are going through and deal out there.
But I would have thought that it would be a natural thing to eat, that it's almost like an involuntary action to be hungry and to satisfy it, even for a 2-year-old. Mm-hmm. Is it that if you're autistic or suffer Asperger's that you have issues with food or food texture? Others were saying that it was the texture of the food or the feeling, or there was a fear of it.
Well, a recent study that was done in the Netherlands, and it was through the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control, pointed out that changing the child's diet with any degree of learning or behavioural difficulty, 64% of these kids benefited hugely, and many of them recovered. So we absolutely do see the relationship between the gut and the brain. So when people have children who have auditory sensitivity, so a child is at home, it cannot handle knives, that's an auditory sensitivity issue.
And is that an issue for autistic children? They're affected by noise or light or commotion in a very negative...
Not necessarily autistic, but autistic children suffer more, because the problem, Neil, going back to the point like with the 2-year-old, or going back to which could genuinely, I mean, some of these kids could genuinely have a pathological problem.
No, in this instance now, both doctors and paediatricians have found nothing.
Yes, well, that's good. That's an important step. But I also would say to you, Neil, is this, that the present medical model and assessments that are being carried out in relation to these children falls short to what really needs to be done. I believe we need to do a much greater subclinical analysis, and that the research that is being carried out there is not being brought into the medical environment. I mean, we know there are huge, so we know that the types of subclinical analysis that need to be done. But one of the key areas is, for example, if a child goes through stress at birth, and any degree of stress, it might not necessarily be a section or a vacuum or a forceps, but certainly those types of births do lay the foundation for huge problems. Now, the thing is that, for the obvious reasons, because any degree of stress or shock to that child affects gut-flora transfer, it affects the left-right brain integration, affects much more than that. But for any of these kids, you see, if the gut-brain isn't functioning properly, if we're not getting the messages up and down, then there are problems. And so, therefore, food plays a major role. So if you take a child, I think you mentioned a child that ate a pizza and chips, for example, lives on that. So forget about the pizza. To the brain, the bread doesn't look like bread. The sauce doesn't look like sauce. The cheese doesn't look like cheese. Our chips don't look like... To the brain, it's dark matter. All the brain is doing, it's taking what the food is converting into. And people need to understand this. So you take the child this morning that got up and had a slice of toast, white toast, maybe some orange juice, maybe some cornflakes. Therein lies the foundation for a huge amount of problem, because that food converts to chemicals, and in the context of gluten, for example, which is the protein that's found in wheat, which is your breads and all of that kind of thing, that converts to a morphine-based chemical. So the kids don't crave certain foods. They crave what the foods convert to. And those foods convert to morphine-based chemicals and indeed other chemicals. So they crave that because the brain cannot process the food properly. So the only way it can get some degree of stimulation is through stimulants like the breads, like high sugar contents and the colorings in certain types of foods. So kids will crave that because the brain is wired based on what it needs. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. I mean, I absolutely do. But I'm just wondering, is that really the issue with, say, an autistic child who has issues with texture and feel and touch?
Yes, again, it goes back to the gut-brain, the vagus nerve connection back to the gut. It goes back to understanding how the
How do you make a child eat then?
Yeah, so that's what I believe needs to happen. I genuinely believe now, and I deal with a lot of these kids. and I know parents are frustrated, Neil, and I genuinely want to say to parents, there is no magic wand or no quick fix on this matter. The first thing that needs to be done, you see, it's fine to go away and get a diagnosis and say we go to our psychologist, but what does a psychologist know about,
They call it a sensory disorder.
Yeah, exactly. So putting a name on any condition that any individual has doesn't resolve anything. Herein lies the problem. You talk about your 2-year-old child. That's taken to the medical system. The medical system says there's nothing wrong. If there's nothing wrong, why is the child behaving the way it's behaving? Often it is simply down to the food. And in this case it is, because this 2-year-old's brain is not developing in accordance. Not that it has brain damage, its sensory ability is not developing. Its auditory, visual, all of the sensory processing that goes on is not developing properly. Now, what has to happen, unfortunately, is this. What I see works for people is that if they understand the body from an energy perspective to release the stress, the right type of nutrition, something like applied behavioral analysis, certainly the assistance they can get at school from an academic perspective, but therein lies a huge difficulty. We're expecting teachers, special needs assistants, to resolve the problem. It won't. This is a real pathological metabolic issue. It's a metabolic problem.
Well, there was a lad who had to drop out of school yesterday. I think he's going to be 18 next birthday. It just wasn't working out for him. He couldn't keep pace. He just wasn't able to adapt to it. And
and I would say to that gentleman who might be frustrated, or parents of that young child who might be frustrated and say, God, this is the child's life now. I would say that's not necessarily the case at all. I would say there are things that can be done, that there are ways that this could be approached where his son could live a normal, independent, healthy life. So, because this is what we see in the research, and when there is proper education brought to parents. And I believe that what needs, unfortunately, parents have to go down the private route. They have to look at people like us who work with the energy system, look at the nutritional side, look at the applied behavior analysis, CLUS, all of these different types of organisations that work. But that's down, unfortunately, down the private route, because the government doesn't accept the real problem, and the Department of Health doesn't accept that this is a real metabolic issue, and that's where we need to look at. And unfortunately, because of that, it alienates people. Some people cannot afford that, Neil, and that is where the difficulty lies. And I believe if the Department of Health, not the Department of Education, because the Department of Education is never going to resolve this, if the Department of Health could in some way roll out some form of education, even through a website, for these parents that could, in some way, could educate them. Because I believe what we need to do is teach these parents how to work with energy to release the stress, how to work with right nutrition, how to work with the types of supplements, getting the proper gut flora in there, because gut flora, enzyme, because if the gut-brain system is not functioning properly, then the enzyme production that breaks down the food, the absorption of nutrients, it's complex. But it's this area is where the problem is coming from. If you or I get stressed, Neil, we overload the part of the nervous system that's connected to the gut, the enteric nervous system. If we overload that, the types of foods and the stuff that we crave, that's why we have the obesity. People who are stressed out there, that's why we have so much in type 2 diabetes. People's metabolism is not functioning right.
But wait a second, I mean, that isn't necessarily always the case, because, like, if you look at socio-demographic groups and people who put on weight, a lot of the time it can be down to laziness or boredom, where there really are no stress issues. There are no pressures to get out of bed in the morning to go and work your ass off to pay your bills. It's just it could be just lethargy and a love of sugar and junk.
Yeah, well, you see, that in itself is the addiction.
But that's not fed by stress.
It depends, you see. Sometimes we think that maybe some people are not stressed for some reason or other. But some people who sit down and who are bored, who don't get up and work, maybe they have some underlying subconscious issue.
But why does there always have to be an issue? Why do we always have to have an excuse?
I think there is. I think there's always an underlying problem, Neil. I genuinely believe there's always an underlying problem, no matter where it's coming from. Whether it's somebody who was told we're worthless and would never be anything. Something stores itself within the subconscious mind. But irrespective of what goes on in the past, and this is the point I want to make in all circumstances, whether it's the case that you make, or whether it's the parents whose children were born through stress, or whether it's parents right now who have children who's suffering from ADD, ADHD, autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, any of these types of conditions. What I'm saying is, from this point, from the moment now, that if parents and individuals were educated to understand how the body functions, and if they were educated to understand the importance of food, the importance of emotional transformation and stress, and how it affects the body, because we live in a stress zone right now. I mean, you can't turn on the television, look at the paper. Nobody knows, what's happening in the future. The world is full of wars and stress and, economically and everything. So we are living in a stressful environment, and you have two parents, who are forced to go out to work. You have, childminders rearing children. And I mean, this absolutely plays into a huge amount of issues. And that's nothing negative, by the way, against, childminders or anything like that. But I'm just saying the environment, if we want to look at the problems in our society, whether it's the massive increase in children with learning and behavioural difficulties, we have to look at changing the environment within the home for these kids, because that's the only place that this can happen. And we did some work with some kids, training parents how to work with their children, in Clare, and all of the kids benefited from this.
Would you do something like that in Cork?
Absolutely. I'd love to do it voluntarily, because, the one thing I hate to see is a sick child. And the sad thing about it is you have parents out there right now who feel, alienated and feel, well, I can't afford this, and they'll feel, well, and it's beyond me, and I'm helpless and hopeless. And I would say to people, no, don't be helpless and hopeless. There are things you can do. But, a parent will say, well, how am I going to get the food into my child? We need to teach the parent. I work with Mary Karen, who is a very good nutritionist in West Limerick, who, deals with this all the time. We work with some medical people who look at this subclinically. So the thing is, we need to find out what stress is causing, is the cause of this problem. And I think if we can bring some degree of education and some degree of skill to the parents and bring it into the home environment, because the reason I'm saying the home environment, when the child is sick, the whole house is sick. The parents are frustrated. Other kids are not getting attention. So there's a huge sort of imbalanced frequency within the home, disharmony. So that creates huge problems. It's like a thorn in your side all the time.
Okay, so that's in one issue with regards to nutrition and diet and what's good and what isn't, and what we should and shouldn't be doing for our body. And that's fine. And let's proceed with something like that. But, with children who are so small or so young, they don't have issues of worry or stress or grief. They're just tiny little things.
Oh yeah, but that's the mistake we're making. I often say to people, don't look at the size of the individual and determine exactly what's going on. I mean, anybody will tell you that any child is born through stress. I mean, we know, for example, the studies now have been done to show that children who are born through C-section, for example, this was a big article that was published in Independent and published worldwide last year. It showed quite clearly that these children who are born through some degree of stress or shock, as I said, C-section, vacuum force abduction, that these have huge allergies simply because of lack of flora transfer. So what they have is they have a metabolic stress. And children are all the time encountering the emotions of the environment. So, I mean, why do children grow up with different types of issues, with social interaction issues and all of that? So the reality is, children, don't look at the size. Think of that child, interacts with its parents, interacts with its environment through the energy system, and is emotional. And of course is going to experience different types of emotional interactions and stresses. And we might not put them down to worry, and we might not put them down to fear, but definitely there's a stress involved. And as I said, just the stress of the birth, or the stress in the womb life, or the stress of any degree of problems through conception, anything like that lays the foundation. So the body goes into stress in many different ways. If it's not emotional, it can be physical. If it's not physical, it can be environmental. And again, too many studies have been done for me to discuss that with you now, but that's the reality of it. But going back to keep it simple, I break the body down very simply. The body is made up of energy. If we can get the energy flowing properly, if we can teach people how to release the stress by working with energy techniques, but
isn't that a case where energy isn't working properly, or the body isn't working from the top down? If for instance, you're on the autistic spectrum, isn't that what the issue there is then? Like, it's important to say that in one particular child, the 2-year-old, he is autistic and won't eat food. Can I just give you a couple of texts that have been coming in? I'm 30 years old. I never ever ate vegetables. I have a 6 and a 2-year-old who wouldn't touch them either. Actually, besides a small choice of meat, both of their diets are all carbs. My son will only eat dry bread. Wouldn't have butter or a slice of ham or cheese for love nor money. I've survived this long just fine without veg, and I'm sure my kids will too. Dinner time is hard enough without upsetting everyone and force feeding them what they don't want. Here's another one. For the first 10 years or so of my life, I had the poorest appetite ever. I dumped my dinner in the loo when I could. I gave it to the cats out the back garden when I could get away with it. The smell of dinner or most savoury foods made me gag. but I had great energy and always wanted to be out playing. I'm in my 30s now and no harm was done. I'm healthy out, no long-term effects. Maybe some people just worry too much that all will come right.
Well, there are some people out there, for some reason or other, have a metabolism that can manage all of that. That's not to say that these people won't end up with problems, and I'm not preempting anything, but that's fine. What do you say to the amount of children out there and the parents right now who are frustrated in their homes, not just because the child won't eat, and not just down to food, but actually back to the child not being able to develop, for the brain to develop properly. That's a much more complex situation. So therefore, we have to be able to give these people some degree of skill and understanding and education to help them to cope with the stress.
Okay.
Because, it causes so much problems.
Okay.
So while there are some people out there, Neil, that might be able to manage that because for whatever reason, but I can assure you that this is the biggest problem. We're a human being. We function through eating naturally. If our body is deficient in nutrients, we end up with problems. There are some people who might be able to cope with that. They're very few and far between. But the reality is, I'm talking about the parents out there right now and the children who have problems, and not just autistic issues, but children who are now laying the foundation for obesity and type 2 diabetes, poor concentration, lack of focus, who might not have these problems. All we have to do is look at our streets and look at the excess waste that our children are carrying. This can only lead to problems. And, we talk about the severe diseases and Ebolas and all this right around the world. The biggest epidemic in our environment and in our country and right across the world, the biggest epidemic is children's health issues. It's huge. There are huge problems within our children's health. And whether it's down to stress at birth, or it's the fact that they're inside watching games all the time, they're not out playing, they're not doing what you and I did. There has to be a reason for it. But right now, the frustration that parents are going through, I believe they need some degree of help. And certainly, as I said to you, Neil, I would be willing to.
Okay, well, let me with that in mind, see if people are interested in doing that. Shall I ask them to email me, or would I ask them if they're interested to email your good self?
Let's work through Red FM, through
okay.
self-column and that, and I will send a column a questionnaire and sort of pick some kids and some parents, and then start from there.
Okay.
And get some parents in and start getting them to work
okay.
with it. But I believe if parents were educated properly and give one good year of working at all levels, not just one.
That's a free seminar with parents who are concerned about their kids' diet, their kids' behaviour, working with the energy, which is what you do, get the energy flowing all through the body. It has miraculous, instantaneous results. And we'll send people we've already spoken to already, and some more too. So I'll encourage them to email me, and we'll talk again soon, Michael. But I will give...
And Neil, the thing is, I can get other parents to talk with them as well. Because I was talking to one parent recently whose child we worked on, and this lady even bought in her own cow to have proper organic milk for her child and things like that. So, look, I would say to parents...
I'm not suggesting that people should have to go that far in a suburban setting.
Exactly, but it just goes to show the extremes.
Oh, yes, that is actually an example of worry in a parent and a stress and wanting to get it right.
But, I want to say to parents, there are things that can be done, but it takes hard work, it takes time and effort, and there's no quick fix. And if people are willing to put in the hard work, time and effort in anything in life, even with this, I think they can create a huge difference in the family environment.
Okay, I want to talk in a second to Laura, who says that kids rule the roost at dinner table, and that's what should be stamped out. Be interesting to see what she has to say on that. But I'll talk to you again, Michael, and I'll give out the details here for now.
Thanks a million.
Cheers for now. MichaelO'Doherty.com. MichaelO'Doherty.com is the website, and there's no apostrophe after the O, Doherty. And if you want to get in touch with us, and we can put together a seminar, please email and give us an idea what's going on in your life. Email neil@redfm.ie. I've worked with Michael Doherty in the past. He really is inspirational, I can tell you.